I walked into the room with my shoulders squared, my heartbeat pounding in my ears like a war drum. The air smelled like stale coffee and old wood polish, but what really hit me was the silence, the kind of silence that doesn't welcome, only waits to judge. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, not with curiosity or warmth, but with something colder, meaner, disbelief, disgust. Maybe even satisfaction. No one said my name. No one said hello. It was as if I'd walked into the wrong funeral, except this one was for my father, and I was still his daughter, at least on paper. Emotionally, spiritually, according to this crowd, I was as dead to them as the man in the casket upstairs. My hand clutched Lily's tighter, her small fingers barely visible inside mine. My daughter, 8 years old and already sharper than most adults in this room. Her gray eyes scanned the long table covered in a white cloth, leather chairs lined neatly like this was a boardroom, not a family gathering. She looked up at me, worry flickering behind her lashes, and I gave her a stiff smile. I didn't want her to see me flinch. I didn't want her to feel like we were the ones who didn't belong. Emily. That voice. Sweet and venomous, like candy laced with cyanide. Meredith, my older sister, always dressed like she was heading to a magazine shoot. Today, a pearl gray suit hugged her body, and her lips were painted a shade of red only people with god complexes could wear without irony. You had the nerve to show up! I didn't answer. I just guided Lily toward the only open seat, conveniently placed at the far end of the table, farthest from the folder everyone had been eyeing since they walked in. I guess you missed the memo, she went on, her tone so casual it made it worse. Dad took you out of the will last year. You know, after everything. There it was, the first slice. Meredith never stabbed you outright. She sliced slow, let the blood seep before going in deeper. My Uncle Gary let out a dry chuckle, leaning back in his chair like he was watching an episode of Succession. Thought you'd at least have the decency to stay away, he said, not bothering to look at me. Or are you here to beg for scraps? Lily shrank a little. Her fingers twisted into the hem of her dress. I placed my hand over hers, steady. I would not let them see me break. Not again. These people once called me daughter, sister, niece. Now they looked at me like I was the stain that wouldn't wash out of the family name. Since I left, since I escaped, I had been erased. Cut out of holiday photos, omitted from group texts. They even cropped me out of the family portraits that still hung in my father's library, which, ironically, was the very room we were sitting in now. And no one, not a single one of them, had ever asked why I left. No one cared to know that when Lily was just 3 months old, I packed a suitcase while still healing from a C-section and walked out of a marriage that had turned into a war zone. No one asked why I knocked on our father's door, soaked in rain, begging for a place to stay, or why he closed that door without a word, just shut it, like I was a stranger. They liked their version of the story better. Emily the selfish one. Emily the disgrace. Emily who abandoned the family when Dad needed her most. I was quiet, but I wasn't blind. Some people have no shame, Meredith said, smiling sweetly as she leaned into her husband. What do you think she's hoping for? A last-minute miracle? She's always been dramatic, her husband whispered back, not softly enough. My eyes didn't waver. I kept them on the man who had just walked in, Mr. Daniels, our father's personal attorney. He was carrying a leather briefcase and a thick manila file. He nodded to everyone, but his eyes paused on me, longer than they did on anyone else. Not with sympathy, but with calculation. I wasn't here to plead for money. I was here because last night, Lily said something that cracked something deep inside me. Mom, she said, her voice soft as we folded laundry together. If Grandpa still remembers you, don't you think you should know? And I said yes. Not for inheritance, Not for redemption, but for closure. Because after all these years of being treated like I was nothing, I just needed to know if my father ever thought of me again, thought of me as his daughter. Across the table, my cousin Travis smirked, like this was a game he'd already won. Edward, the one who once built Lego towers with me in his bedroom when we were 10, didn't even look in my direction. And Aunt Margie, who hadn't sent me a Christmas card in 9 years, dabbed at her eyes like she had lost something precious, like she hadn't been part of the reason I left. Mr. Daniels placed the briefcase gently on the table and began to unlock it. I didn't know what was inside, but I had a gut feeling this wasn't going to be as clean as they all expected, because I hadn't come here as the broken girl who left 7 years ago. I came back as a woman who had survived, and they had no idea what truth they were about to hear. You don't just walk into a room like that without preparing for war. The night before the will reading, I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, Lily already tucked into bed, her breathing soft and steady in the next room. A half-empty cup of herbal tea sat untouched on the coffee table. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from everything I was trying to hold back. Rage, pain, and something worse, the hollow ache of being erased. I had rehearsed this moment for years not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to stop needing their approval. Still, some part of me clung to the possibility that maybe my father had left something, anything, that proved he hadn't entirely forgotten me. But just in case, I had my own plan. The first step had begun over a year ago. It was a random Tuesday when I received a call from Mr. Daniels' assistant. She was updating me on a scholarship application I'd submitted for Lily. Something minor, procedural, but something in her voice felt off. Polite, but hesitant. When I asked if my father had ever mentioned me in the firm's documents or updated anything regarding me, there was a pause. A long one. "I can't say much," she said, "but you may want to speak with Mr. Daniels directly." That single sentence was the spark. It told me there was something there, something beneath the carefully crafted silence that my family had wrapped around me like a burial shroud. From that day forward, I began documenting everything, not out of paranoia, out of necessity. I started collecting letters my father had written me before the fallout, tucked away in an old shoebox under my bed. Birthday cards, photos with scribbled notes, things that proved we had once been close. I scanned them, filed them digitally, encrypted the folder with a password only I knew, just in case. Then came the financial side. I went through every scholarship and estate-related document with a fine-tooth comb. Not because I expected a penny, but because I needed to understand what they were hiding, how deep the erasure ran. And it ran deep. Even my name was removed from the family trust registry. I was listed only as estranged. No birth date, no legal acknowledgement of being his child anymore. It was like I'd been surgically removed. The pain didn't come all at once. It dripped in, like a leak from a ceiling you thought was sturdy. Every paper I reviewed was another reminder that the people who should have defended me had chosen to forget me. Deliberately, but I didn't let that break me. I wrote letters to myself at 3 a.m. I recorded voice memos when I felt myself slipping. I created a digital timeline of everything that had happened from the day I left my ex-husband to the moment I received that call from Mr. Daniels' assistant. I needed to track it, not for the court of law, but for the court of truth, for me, for Lily, for closure. And then, 6 months ago, something changed. Lily came home from a school visit to my father's house. It had been arranged through Meredith, who still liked to parade her family loyalty for the world to see. I had reluctantly agreed, thinking perhaps it was a chance for Lily to know the man who once braided my hair on Sunday mornings and read me bedtime stories about birds and sky. But when she came back, she was quiet. Not sad, not scared, just thoughtful. "He gave me something," she said, pulling a small envelope from her backpack. "But he told me not to give it to you until the right time." I stared at the envelope like it might explode. It was sealed with brown tape and written in blocky handwriting. I hadn't seen in years were the words, "For Mr. Daniels, only if it gets ugly." My chest caved inward for a moment. My hands shook as I held it, but I didn't open it. I couldn't. It wasn't mine to open. I tucked it away in the fireproof safe beneath my bed. And I waited. I didn't ask Lily what else he had said. I knew better than to pull too hard on a thread that wasn't ready to unravel. She was 8, but she was mine, which meant she had my sense of timing, my instinct for survival, and she would know when the time was right. In the meantime, I strengthened myself. Therapy, journaling, night shifts, financial planning. I worked overtime when I could, stocking away emergency savings, not because I feared being cut off, but because I was building a life where their rejection couldn't touch me anymore. That's what survival looked like in my world. Quiet resilience, dignified distance, calculated patience. So when Meredith smirked across the table during the will reading, assuming I was here to scramble for whatever crumbs she hadn't already claimed, she had no idea. She had no idea how deeply I'd prepared. She didn't know about the envelope. She didn't know that I had long since stopped needing their acceptance and started focusing on the only truth that mattered, mine. And if that envelope ever came into play, it wouldn't be as a last-ditch effort. It would be the final move, the one they'd never see coming. I could feel Meredith watching me from across the table, the corners of her lips twitching upward every time someone glanced my way. There was something about the way she held herself, legs crossed just so, fingers interlaced over a leather-bound planner, diamond bracelet catching the light, that screamed, "I've already won." Her voice cut through the quiet like a scalpel. "You really thought you could just show up after all this time and—" "What, Emily? Get a participation trophy?" I didn't flinch. She wanted a reaction. That's how she operated. Throw the bait, then sit back while people scrambled to prove her wrong. I'd done that before, once, never again. Uncle Gary snorted, swirling the whiskey in his glass, as if he were toasting my funeral. "It's bold. I'll give you that. Marching in like you're still part of this family." The rest of the room didn't speak, but their silence was heavy with agreement. My cousin Travis glanced at Meredith, then leaned back in his chair like he was watching a reality show unfold. Their game was clear. Humiliate me before the reading began, wear me down enough to keep me from noticing the knife they were about to twist. But I wasn't the same girl who'd left years ago. I took a deep breath, my gaze drifting to the framed portrait of our father on the mantel, stoic, distant, eyes that always seemed to be looking at something beyond you, never into you. The same look he gave me that day I stood on the porch, soaked and shaking, holding Lily in one arm and a suitcase in the other. "He made his decision," Meredith said crisply, like a lawyer delivering a verdict. Dad was very clear about who he trusted and who he didn't. Her husband, Ethan, the spineless financier who always hovered just behind her shoulder, nodded in agreement. Harold didn't have room for disloyalty. Family means something. You chose to leave. I could have laughed, not because anything was funny, but because it was all so rehearsed. As if they'd been waiting years to deliver these lines, polishing them for maximum impact. "I didn't leave the family," I said, my voice steady. "I left a man who made our home unsafe. There's a difference." Meredith raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Semantics, Emily. You disappeared. Dad offered support. You chose isolation. That wasn't support. That was silence. But again, I didn't explain. I wasn't here to retell my pain. I was here to watch them cling to a reality they had built like a fortress, one brick at a time, out of half-truths and selective memory. Edward, who had remained mostly quiet, finally spoke up, eyes fixed on his phone as he scrolled through something meaningless. "Don't take it personally," he mumbled. Dad was a practical man. He valued legacy, not drama. Jaw drama. That's what they called surviving abuse. What they called walking away from a life that would have buried me. Drama, like it was a choice I made for attention, not survival. I looked down to the table, past the smug faces and smugger silence, and saw Lily tracing patterns into the tablecloth with her finger. Her face was calm, but I knew that look. She was absorbing everything, watching, learning. She reached for her juice box, then paused, looking toward Meredith with a kind of quiet defiance I recognized in my own reflection. There was steel in her bones already. She didn't need anyone's approval to exist in this room. She just needed to see that I wasn't going to break. "I heard you're still in that little apartment in Queens," Meredith said suddenly, as if the thought just occurred to her. "That's sweet. Nostalgic, really." I smiled, sharp and small, still managing to live without folding myself into someone else's version of success. Her eyes narrowed, but she caught herself before the expression could turn into a scowl. See, Meredith didn't just want me gone. She wanted me irrelevant, and my presence at the reading shattered that illusion. She had already planned the celebration, renovations to the main house, selling off the antiques, maybe even turning the lakeside property into a luxury Airbnb. Dad's estate wasn't a legacy to her. It was a launch pad, and I had disrupted her narrative just by walking through the door. The truth? She never expected me to show. That's what all this was about. The sudden barbs, the underhanded insults. It wasn't about what I'd done. It was about the fact that I still had the audacity to exist, to breathe, to sit at that table and not apologize for being alive. "You know what Dad said to me the week before he passed?" she said, her voice lower now, more intimate, as if we were the only two in the room. He said, "Some daughters make you proud. Others just make you tired." That one landed, not because I believed her, but because I knew he might have actually said it. And yet, I said nothing. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he also said something else. Something he hadn't told anyone. Something sealed in an envelope, hidden in my daughter's backpack. They thought this was the end. But they had no idea it was only the opening act. Lily's voice sliced through the tension like a whisper dropped into a canyon. "You forgot the video Grandpa gave me." Every head turned. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Even the ticking wall clock seemed to stop. Meredith blinked, then tilted her head slightly, the polished calm cracking at the edges. Mr. Daniels, already mid-sentence in the formal reading, froze. He stared at my daughter, eyebrows raised, uncertain. "Excuse me?" he asked gently. Lily reached into her backpack without looking at me. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Her movements were deliberate, like she had rehearsed this moment in her mind. She pulled out a white envelope, worn around the edges but still sealed, brown tape running across the back like a security strap. Her voice didn't waver. "Grandpa said to give this to you, only if things got ugly." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought I might throw up. I hadn't touched that envelope since the night she handed it to me. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I could read the weight in her eyes, the quiet burden she'd carried. Mr. Daniels took the envelope from her with both hands, handling it like it was made of glass. He studied the handwriting. I didn't need to look. I'd recognize that script anywhere. It was my father's. The silence was a vacuum. Uncle Gary leaned forward, his cigar breath practically audible. "What the hell is this?" Meredith stood. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice pitching up in false confidence. "That's not official. It's probably just some sentimental note." but Daniels was already opening it. Inside, a small black USB and a folded piece of notepaper, handwritten. His lips moved as he skimmed it. When he looked up, the color in his face had changed. Not panic, but revelation. This is a supplemental recording made by Mr. Harold Carter, dated and notarized. It was meant to be presented only in the event of familial discord at the time of the will reading. His voice didn't need to explain further. This was the moment he had been anticipating, the moment I had been bracing for. Lily climbed into my lap without a word, curling into me like she had when she was smaller. She knew. She had always known. Daniels crossed the room to the corner desk where his laptop waited. He plugged in the USB, double-clicked the only file on it, and then stepped back. The screen flickered, went black, then lit up with the familiar backdrop of my father's study, the one upstairs. The same armchair, the same lamp. And there he was, wearing the cardigan I gave him the Christmas before everything fell apart. His face looked thinner, his eyes darker. But there was no doubt. It was him. "If you're watching this," he began, voice low, "then it means I didn't get it right the first time." The room didn't breathe. I let other people decide how I remembered my daughter. I let anger do the speaking. And for that, I am ashamed. Meredith paled. I was told she left out of selfishness, that she ran from responsibility. I never asked. I never called. I closed a door I shouldn't have. And now I live with that regret. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted a small photo. It was of me and Lily. I remembered the day it was taken. Lily was 2, her curls wild. Both of us smiling like the world hadn't yet betrayed us. "I met Lily," he continued, "and in one sentence, she told me everything I failed to understand. She said, 'Mom is where safe lives.'" I couldn't stop the tear that rolled down my cheek. Lily nestled closer, her little arms wrapping around my waist. "Emily," he said, eyes locking onto the camera like he was speaking directly to me. "You didn't walk away. You protected your child. You did what I was too proud to do. Ask questions. Listen. Learn." He paused, then added quieter, "And I'm sorry." The murmurs around the table grew louder, but he wasn't done. "That is why I rewrote my will. There is a legally binding revision with Mr. Daniels. Everything, my home, my investments, the education fund, it belongs to Emily and Lily now, because they deserve the future I never gave them." That was when Meredith lost it. "No!" she shouted, stepping forward, hands clenched. "This isn't real. That's not what he meant. He was sick. He was manipulated." Mr. Daniels calmly held up the notarial seal. "This recording was made 2 weeks before his death. He was of sound mind, and I personally witnessed the signing of the revised documents." Brandon tried to speak. Uncle Gary opened his mouth, then closed it again. Edward looked like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. The empire they built on denial was cracking. And there I sat, still and quiet, not because I was in shock, but because I'd expected this, planned for it, prepared. I wasn't here to take anything from them. I was here to claim what they thought I'd never earn. Validation. Meredith turned and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. No one followed her. One by one, the others faded. Chairs scraped back, coats slipped on, silence trailing behind them like smoke. When it was over, it was just me, Lily, and the truth. And finally, that was enough. The room emptied like a tide rolling out, leaving only what mattered behind. I stayed in my chair, Lily curled beside me, her head resting quietly against my side. The screen had gone dark again, but my father's words still echoed in the corners of the room, clinging to the air like fog refusing to lift. I could still hear him say it. "You deserve the future I never gave you." Mr. Daniels gathered his paperwork in silence, his movements respectful, almost reverent. He didn't look at me like the others had, like I was something broken that needed fixing. He looked at me like someone who had just witnessed something sacred. When he spoke, it was soft, but certain. The revised testament will take immediate effect. You'll receive full access to the estate within 30 days. My office will walk you through every step. I nodded, unable to form a single word in return. Gratitude didn't cover what I felt. Relief didn't either. This wasn't about money, not really. It wasn't about revenge or victory either. Not in the way they'd understand. It was about recognition. That for once, someone saw me not as the black sheep, not as the failure, not as the runaway daughter, but as someone who endured, who protected, who stayed true. As Daniels left, his footsteps fading into the long hallway, Lily shifted in my arms. "Is it over?" she asked. I thought for a long moment before answering. "Not over," I said, "but it's no longer something we have to carry." She smiled faintly, and I brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. In her eyes, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Ease. Peace. Like the weight she didn't even realize she was holding had finally lifted. We stepped outside together, the heavy oak door closing behind us with a dull thud that didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a release. The late afternoon sun had dipped lower, drenching the lawn in gold, the kind of light that makes you think something better might be coming. I looked back at the house, once a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Now it stood differently in my mind. Not a palace of judgment or a fortress of shame. It was a place where truth finally came out, where silence was broken. And somehow, that changed everything. We drove back to the city in silence, the kind that didn't sting. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, her small hands tucked under her chin. I glanced at her in the mirror and smiled. She had carried the weight of that envelope for months, quietly, bravely. She had protected something I wasn't ready to face, and when the moment came, she knew exactly what to do. It struck me then, more clearly than ever. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my legacy. And now, she would grow up knowing that no matter how many people try to write you out of the story, you can always write yourself back in. Louder, clearer, truer. When we pulled into our neighborhood, the street was quiet, the sidewalk speckled with golden leaves. I parked in front of our building, the same place they once pitied me for living in. But as I looked up at it now, I didn't see smallness. I saw survival. A home I built with nothing but grit and love. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the kitchen window, watching the last light of day slip between buildings. The silence around me felt new. Not lonely, not anxious, just still. I took a breath. It was done. They had taken everything from me once. My voice, my place, my name. And I had let them back then, because I didn't think I deserved more. But now I knew better. And it wasn't because my father left me an inheritance. It was because, in the end, he admitted the truth. He gave back what he'd stolen with his silence. He gave me acknowledgement. He gave Lily a chance. That was worth more than any dollar amount in that trust. That was the beginning of something I could build on. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages, old ones, the ones I'd never deleted, ones that used to hurt. The text from Meredith that read, "You made your choices, don't come crying later." The email from Uncle Gary, not even addressed to me, saying I was a cautionary tale. I deleted them all, not out of spite, but because they no longer held power. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, I took out my journal, the same one I'd been writing in since the day I left my ex-husband. The pages were filled with pain, with fear, with moments I thought would break me. But I flipped to a clean page, and I wrote, I was never the disgrace. I was the storm they tried to ignore. That night, I slept without waking, without waiting for the other shoe to drop, without bracing for another blow. And when morning came, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of choice, of direction, of clarity, because I had taken back the one thing they never meant to give me, my story. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in my place? Would you have walked into that room knowing everyone would be against you? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought for the truth? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the discarded one, the underestimated one, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking anything back. It's being seen and walking forward anyway.